Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. We're going to allow folks to roll in and get started in another minute or two. So thank you for your patience. All right. Well, with that, we're just going to be mindful of time and go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Wilson. I'm the Executive Director of Uptown United and Uptown Chamber of Commerce. And we are so thrilled tonight to have Uptown United partner with the Department of Planning and Development and SB Friedman to do a tax increment financing 101 for you all today. So just a quick intro of who we as Uptown United are. We are the neighborhood economic development organization for the Uptown community area. We work in partnership with our partner, Uptown Chamber of Commerce, to ensure a strong and unified business environment, facilitate economic development, and really just to make sure that Uptown is a diverse and thriving neighborhood. The Uptown United's been doing this for almost 30 years, and our chamber's been at it for 101 years. So we're proud to be longtime partners in the neighborhood with our colleagues on this call. Some quick housekeeping tips before we get into the crux of this webinar. This webinar will be recorded. So any comments or questions that come up later on in the session will be recorded. It will be housed on Uptown United's website at the conclusion of this so that it will be available for future viewing. We will take questions and answers at the end of this presentation. We do have the chat feature off. However, you can ask questions in the Q&A box as you think of them, and we will monitor it and get to them in the public setting. All of this is really just to educate folks on what TIF is. It has been in the news a lot lately for good reason. And so we as an organization want to really strip it down to the basics to explain what TIF is, projects it's funded, and if TIF doesn't exist in your area, what are alternative funding opportunities? So this is really just a true 101. And we really appreciate you coming out tonight and wanting to learn more. And so with that, I will just do a quick rundown. We're going to talk about what is TIF. We're specifically going to give some examples of projects that have been funded in Uptown TIF districts. And then we will go to what are some of the alternative funding tools that are available for areas that have either a TIF expiring or don't have TIF at all. And so with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to my colleagues at SB Friedman.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Can you guys hear me? Super. Hi, everybody. My name is Jeff Dickinson. I am with SB Friedman Development Advisors. A little bit about us. I'm here with my colleague, Jillian Gullett. She helped me put these slides together. I appreciate that. We are a consulting firm, a private sector consulting firm, but we do have experience in the Uptown area as well. We helped Uptown United and SSA 34 with the reconstitution efforts in 2014. So we are very lightly knowledgeable about Uptown. I presume pretty much every other person on this phone call besides me knows more about Uptown, but we do know a little bit. We have been a consultant to the city of Chicago, I think, for over 25 years on TIF things. That predates me starting work here, but I think that's true. Tim, I guess that probably predates Tim too, but quite a while. I'm on the board of the TIF Association of Illinois. Basically, we do a lot of work with TIF in a variety of forms, some of which for the city, in the suburbs, and we work around the country with tools like this. So we have a fair bit of experience. We're going to focus on Illinois TIF, but there's a lot of similarities. So I'll just jump in on what it is. TIF is an area-based, I guess the first bullet here, tool. So it is not for entire cities. It is a targeted tool. It's supposed to be used to intervene in situations where development isn't occurring in a way that local government wants it to be. It is local government controlled. That is to say, you don't have to ask permission. Your cities are given permission by the state of Illinois to use TIF. They have to decide to use it. They have to decide when, where, how, but it's an inherent power of local government under state law. And the last part of the first bullet, I think, is probably the most important bit of it. It's a tool to support local land use goals. So the fundamental, TIF doesn't do anything. It is just a way to generate money to make the things that the community wants happen. So local land use goals vary a lot, and it's very context dependent. Obviously, Sarah or Justin, somebody's going to talk about the local land use goals in Uptown and how the funds have been used, but that's the driving policy framework. What does the community want that isn't happening, basically? How is the market not delivering? Because free market can't deliver everything, not delivering the land use goals we want. And TIF is a way to have money to make the things that aren't already happening happen. In order to use TIF, state law requires certain eligibility factors be found, and I'll talk a little more in detail about that later. It also requires that the governing body, the city council or village board, believes that but for the district being created and the tool being put in place, the desired development outcomes wouldn't happen. So that's usually the thing I say when I'm talking, again, to suburban boards more frequently. If you think this can happen without TIF, vote no. Like that is the right thing to do. That is the legal thing to do. And generally, that's not the case. Basically, local land use goals have been pursued often for many years, and they haven't been realized. And so that's sort of an informal but-for test. We haven't got what we wanted. We've tried X, Y, and Z, and now we need to use TIF. It does have a finite amount of time. It can be extended, but the initial term is 23 years. So you have 23 years of funding support initially to try to make the things that aren't happening happen. The way it works is it essentially diverts increases in taxes for that defined area. Again, you've got to draw a shape around a particular number of parcels, and the increased taxes can be reinvested into basically the shape that you've described. So one parcel, we've done one parcel TIFs, we've done TIFs with thousands of parcels in them. Again, it can be very flexible in terms of scale, but the basic mechanics are the same. As taxes go up, you have a source of funds to drive those local land use goals. It is flexible, it is powerful, and it is one of the few tools. Tim's going to talk about a new one that the city has taken, but for most towns in Illinois, it's really the biggest financial tool you can have to make things that aren't already happening from a development point of view happen. It's not a tax hike, and it's not a tax increase or decrease, I should say, abatement. So the taxes on every parcel should be the same, regardless of whether they're in a TIF or not. It has nothing to do with the value of your home or the taxes that are levied against your home or the tax rate. It's just a diverting where the taxes you would pay either way go. Without a TIF, all your taxes go to all the different taxing bodies. With a TIF, a percentage is diverted into the TIF fund that city council controls. Spending the money is discretionary. Cities could create TIFs and then never spend any money. So you can create the district. I think after 7 years under state law, if you don't do anything, you have to close it out. But there's no obligation for the city to say, give a developer the taxes from his or her redevelopment project. That is entirely discretionary. Again, the extent to which it is supporting local land use goals is a big part of the equation as to how much money they get. It's often there's all sorts of other factors, but if you're delivering the greatest dream in the history of the village or wherever, the chances of you getting access to TIF are higher than if you're delivering I guess I shouldn't pick a spot, but whatever, gas station at the corner of X and Y. You know what I mean? Like that is a kind of a garden variety land use. In some towns, that's a huge land use goal, but in most towns, that is something the market can deliver on its own. So again, towns get to decide what's important to them and what deserves public money. I think generally speaking, most real estate doesn't deserve public money. Most real estate development, it works fine on its own. 9 times out of 10, 95 times out of 100. And it's in those other parts that the discussions occur, and this tool can be the right thing. As a technical matter, it's a reimbursement tool. Fundamentally, you can't use TIF to reimburse for new buildings in a simplistic way. So there's a little bit of fussiness around how to give the money back to a development project. But it is, as I say, relatively flexible. Greenfield, new construction is a little trickier to use TIF on than rehab for sure. Sometimes I wonder about the order of my own slides. The enabling legislation is here. That's the power that the state of Illinois gives to local government, City of Chicago City Council, or village boards of every other town in the state. So it's enabled by legislation. It is a two-step process. This often gets confused when we're helping a town create a new TIF district. Sometimes people start talking about how they're going to spend the money, and those are really two decisions. Sometimes they're close together in time, sometimes they're far apart in time. But to create a district, a city must find that the area is eligible. They must adopt a plan consistent with state law. And that essentially, sends some information to the county from an administrative point of view. But that's how you create a TIF district. Again, there's no obligation to spend any money at that point. You just have the shape has been created and the powers exist, but you don't have to do anything in terms of spending money. Spending money is, as I say, a subsequent decision. We've outlined 3 ways TIF funds can be spent. Sometimes it's through a redevelopment agreement with a private developer. I guess I can't venture as to say how often each of these 3 things gets used, but that's one way to do it. That's usually the highest profile way that TIF funds are spent. People are concerned, why is the public sector giving money to a private developer? And that's a good question, and we help scrutinize those questions and explain those as best we can when we work on behalf of municipalities. You can also use TIF funds. The city council can decide to spend TIF funds via an intergovernmental agreement. So that's a contract between, say, a city and a park district, for example. The city of Chicago, again, is kind of a weird case. No offense to everybody here who lives in the city, including me, but the way park districts are different, independent bodies in other parts of the state. And if there's a park district project in a TIF area that supports the goals of the TIF plan and the land use goals of the community, it's possible to reimburse the park district, for example, with TIF funds. So that's one way to do it. And then you can pay for municipal costs. This is a fairly common way to use TIF money. Cities use TIF to help pay for road, water, sewer, other infrastructure costs that, particularly if they're poorer communities or otherwise financially limited, they don't have the resources to do it. So it's spending money on infrastructure that might otherwise not get invested that sets the table for private development. That's another way to do it. So there's several different ways to do it, but those are all separate votes essentially from the governing body. There's a vote to create the district, and then there are votes to approve either RDAs or intergovernmental agreements, or just pay for municipal projects. But they're separate universes. Universes may be a little dramatic, but they're separate events. So why do cities use TIF? Why can't they just do this sort of thing without it? It's a targeted tool to try to avoid blight occurring. And I'll talk again about eligibility, but areas qualify if they are not blighted, but they're at risk of becoming blighted. It's called a conservation area. And cities can say, we want to intervene, put this tool in place, and spend some money to make sure it doesn't get worse. That's a purpose. Cities can use the TIF funds to eliminate blight. Blight exists. We don't like blight. Blight is bad. Let's try to foster redevelopment to turn the tide in this part of our town. Sometimes it's not as much about the real estate as it is about economic development goals. We want to attract or retain a big employer. That's important. That can be particularly important. And a lot of these are more relevant in towns that are smaller than Chicago. Chicago, I'm sure, has used them for all these reasons. But if you're a small town, you have one big employer and they're threatening to leave, that's an all hands on deck concern. And if TIF can help keep them in town, they need to do an expansion, they need some help. Towns use TIF to do that. Towns, again, I'm not sure how much the city does this, but the suburbs in particular will chase sales tax projects to get the sales taxes. That's a hugely important aspect of the fiscal health of municipalities in Illinois. And so they can use TIF to try to retain a Walmart, for example. It's not a very attractive thing to do, but it definitely happens. We can't lose the sales tax. That's 3 cops that we can't pay for next year if the Walmart moves out of town. So there's a range of purposes, but again, they're all supporting, as I said earlier, local land use or policy goals. Like, what do we need to do? Attract jobs, retain jobs, attract tax base, fix the physical condition, blight mitigation, those sorts of things. This other set of bullets, I guess, we like to have a coherent rationale. Why is the city involved? A city, a municipality. Often that framework can be extraordinary development costs. There's something uniquely messed up about a building or a site or a neighborhood. The infrastructure is substandard and failing, and we need to put a bunch of road, water, and sewer into a neighborhood that doesn't have his own well and septic. Again, I'm thinking of rural environments, not city environment. That's a thing I can think of as an extraordinary cost that the project itself maybe even can't bear and the city can't bear it. They need a special source of money to fix those things. There's environmental remediation is a pretty common use of TIF funds. The site's dirty. We need to help clean it up. We need this project to move sooner than it will if we don't get involved. Some towns use TIF to prove a market. No one's built a new apartment building, a market rate apartment building in our downtown in 25 years. I was on a phone call having that very conversation this morning. And the city is saying we need to get someone to invest in a market rate apartment, not an affordable project, but a market rate project in our little downtown. And we're willing to de-risk that project to some extent, take some of the costs away from the project and attract investment that otherwise is not going to come, at least anytime soon. So the hope is you prove the market with an assisted deal, and the next deal needs less or no assistance. So that's a very it's a proactive stance on redevelopment, whether it's for housing or anything else. Basically, we're not getting what we want. Let's support the first one and hope the second one comes on its own. Could be a downtown restaurant. That's pretty common. We don't have enough a sit-down restaurant in our downtown. We want one. Let's use TIF to incentivize the first and hope we can create a downtown dining environment. Some towns want to create higher quality. They get very concerned about materials. This is, I don't think, a big city Chicago priority, but we want to see, if you build to our code, it looks like this, but we want it to look nicer than that. Again, to try to, for prestige reasons, sort of attract nicer stuff in the future. TIF can help. You can't pay for the building itself, but you can pay for other things that allow the developer to pay more for the materials and the levels of finish than they otherwise could, based on the rents they can achieve. Driving development that delivers more public benefits. So a town wants a downtown plaza that is publicly accessible on a private development site, and the developer says, I don't want to pay for that. My tenants don't care. You can use TIF to help pay for public improvements that everybody can enjoy. That might not necessarily be produced by the market. We don't have a place to sit down. There's no fountain. There's towns in the suburbs who really are into fountains. It's not the greatest use of TIF, maybe, but it's important to them, and therefore it's okay. And then job retention and attraction, as I mentioned earlier, is a fairly common struggle, particularly the towns that are closer to Wisconsin and industrial jobs. They see them, a lot of them jump on the state line, and so you have to use TIF to try to level the playing field. So there's a lot of different, again, there's a long list of ways in which and reasons why a local government might put public money into a private development. What are the challenges or criticisms? People are worried that it's a tax hike. I mentioned it earlier. It's not. The TIF process is separate from the assessment process, which is separate from the property tax levy approval process. These are all different processes that when you put them all together, you get a tax bill in your email or in your mail. But TIF doesn't have anything to do with the value, directly with the value of your home or the tax rate that's applied to your home or your property. So that's a misunderstanding sometimes. People often ask, can we just do nothing? Why do we need to intervene at all? And as I mentioned earlier, usually that's been a strategy before someone calls the TIF consultant. They've been looking and waiting and hoping and trying and doing different things to try to get the outcomes they want, and it hasn't happened. Sometimes that time is passing and the property values in the study area that we end up looking at have been declining, and so the tax base is consistently weakening. The mechanics of property taxation means if your property values in one area are going down, the tax burden is essentially shifting to the rest of your tax community. So doing nothing that's not always the case with TIF, but in my experience, it's 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 TIFs that the area that we're studying is lagging the rest of town. And so you're effectively seeing a tax burden shift already from doing nothing. And so you can keep doing nothing. That is an option, and hope that it stops or hope it turns itself around. But often towns don't want to wait, and they've tried a lot of stuff and they need to pull out another tool. Does the diversion of taxes take money from other districts? This is commonly discussed, particularly in the suburbs, particularly in the context of school districts. There's a perception that that's true. If you believe that the development that is occurring would not have occurred without the TIF, it's just fundamentally not true. Sometimes there is property value appreciation that occurs. So 2% a year that might have occurred otherwise. That I think there's some argument there that the schools are missing out on a little bit of tax base growth. The TIF Act does provide for tuition payments if there are TIF supported housing units. So the schools do get a separate check if a school kid moves into a TIF supported apartment, for example, in a suburban context. And the transit TIF has a particular carve out, just as an aside, for CPS. So that's a special case. They've got special legislation around that. So CPS is made whole, if I remember correctly. And Tim can correct me, hopefully, if I'm wrong. So there are provisions for this. Also, based on levy, again, we can get into the mechanics of how property taxes are generated, but basically most of the taxing bodies in northeastern Illinois are tax capped, and they can't, there's a limit on how much money they can raise anyhow, basically, and under the other state law. So the TIF doesn't have anything to do with that. It just shifts the burden around slightly. So that's pretty complicated, kind of technical. I can probably unpack that further if people want to. And then is it dependent on growth in tax base? The answer is fundamentally yes. If you create a TIF and the values don't go up, there's no money. And so then the city council doesn't have any money to spend on anything. So you have to see tax base growth somewhere, somehow. Or, I mean, you can create the TIF, it just doesn't have any money to do anything. There's some powers, you get some legal powers, but usually the primary focus is on getting a project that generates taxes, that generates increment, that can pay for things. This is a list, I'm not going to go through it, of how you make an eligibility finding. This is all just in the state law. So we do homework on these things. 3 of these factors plus old buildings is one way to get there. That's the conservation area. 5 or more would get you a blighted area. So there's a research task, and we work with other people, engineers and other things to do the homework to make sure that those facts are found and documented. There are separate rules for vacant land. I won't even go into that. That's probably not even, now that I think about it, particularly relevant in the city of Chicago, but in other parts of the state, you can do a vacant land TIF, and there's just a different set of rules. So you got to do a little bit of different homework, but we write that up, and that goes to a city council as part of the report when they are considering creating the district. Procedurally, there's a lot of rules. I guess maybe that's the point of this slide. Sometimes people feel like it's a big surprise that a new TIF is getting created. Obviously, we work on them, so we're pretty aware when it's happening, but you have to send a notice to the affected taxing bodies when the city has to do this, municipality, when they start a TIF creation process. Then a consultant, or not necessarily a consultant like us, does eligibility research and writes a report. Then there's some notices that have to go out, both in mailings and to the newspaper. There's 2 public meetings, a joint review board meeting and a public hearing. And then there's another city council or village board meeting at which the district is created through ordinance approvals, and then you send the paperwork to the county to administer it. So there are numerous events and notices sent. We think it's a responsible level of communication, but people don't always read the mail and all that stuff. And I understand why they feel like they're getting, blindsided, but it seems like a lot for a person who deals with it routinely. There's a lot of chances to be made aware of a new district getting created. This one, we're getting close to the end. I'm trying to cook here a little bit. There's a couple of more slides. This is the sort of the economics of a TIF district. So to the left in the light gray, I don't know if you guys can see my mouse, this is the base taxes that the taxing districts get before the TIF is created. When the TIF is created, you basically freeze the value. So the dark gray bars are during the TIF period, and the tax base is essentially frozen for the taxing bodies. That's the city, the county, the schools, the parks, all of them. And they don't get any taxes insofar as values go up. So here's what happens. Hopefully, projects happen, the orange happens, taxes go up, and the taxes that are generated in the orange part of the bar chart go into the TIF fund for the city council to decide how to reinvest in the district. Oh, I did that out of order. So again, this goes back to, you can reimburse a developer, you can issue bonds, you can fund public projects, you can do lots of stuff with the money, but that's where the money comes from, is taxes that have gone up as a result of projects that otherwise wouldn't have happened. And then district expires. So 23 years, again, there's a possibility of extensions, but that's the normal life. And then the taxing bodies have access to the full tax base. So the orange portion, they can now levy against that. And that means either the taxing bodies all have more money in the next year, or they have a lower tax rate, in theory. Those are the 2 things that could happen when you get a bigger tax base. Either you have more money from the same tax base because you have access to all of it, or you say, we don't need any more money, we'll just tax everybody a little slightly lower rate and get to the same number. So that's the payoff in the long term for taxing bodies, but 23 years is a long time. For counties, it's slightly different bird. I won't make too much of this, but we looked at one parcel in the Wilson Yard TIF just as an example. The number $5,133 was the base value of that property times the tax rate on that property. The current value, the total tax bill was 10 grand, and it was basically a 50-50 split between the base and the incremental EAV. So that's what you would think is the way the money should flow. Half of it would go to the TIF fund, half would go to the affected taxing bodies. Actually, 80% of it went to the TIF fund and 20% went to the taxing bodies. We think, and we didn't go all the way down the road, Jillian and I, with this one, but Cook County doesn't calculate incremental EAV on a parcel basis, and that can distort things. If it collects it and it calculates it in a tax base, or I'm sorry, tax code basis. I won't even try to explain a tax code, but suffice it to say, it's a combination of many parcels. And if some of them are down and some of them are up, and particularly if there's a SSA or other taxing district that's got a really small tax base, relatively speaking, it can distort the effect of TIF a little bit mathematically. So that's a unique problem in Cook County. Cook County is working on it. We've spoken to them. They've got software changes that are pending that should make the math look like this. But for now, and this, I'm not sure it always works like this, but this is just one parcel that we looked at where it worked like this. You know, it's complicated if I haven't made that clear with my ramblings. So upon expiration, I guess we already said that they get access to the gray bars on the right. So maybe this is a slightly redundant slide. So that's as I said, the tax-based payoff, and that's it for me. I can unshare. I believe that's what I need to do, right?
Yes. Thank you, Jeff and Jillian, for putting together the fundamentals of what is TIF, how is it set up, how is it calculated. And so we're going to dive a little bit more into Uptown specific, although this you can explore later, and I will have a slide on this, all the TIFs that exist in the city. There are quite a few of them, and Tim can get into that in greater detail later. But just wanted to give examples of all of the TIFs that exist in the Uptown community area, why they were established, and go through some projects, just to give you some context for why these were established and if they are indeed meeting some of the goals or objectives. So one of the most common and well-known TIFs in Uptown is the Wilson Yard TIF. You can see it is really centered around the Wilson Broadway intersection here. It is 144 acres in size, so quite expansive. And it was established in 2001. So we're nearing the expiration. Jeff said it is 23 years. So we're nearing that end, December 31st, 2025. The overall goal, there were 14 of them, and objectives for the Wilson Yard TIF was to really redevelop the CTA Wilson Yard site. There had been a vacant yard site there that really was in need of some injection of investment. And so the TIF was really focused on that, along with improving the physical improvement between Montrose and Wilson along Broadway. But it really also focused on preservation and the rehab of our retail and commercial businesses all along any of these streets identified here within the boundaries. And it also focused on the preservation and the rehab of existing multifamily and affordable housing. Jeff also mentioned that many TIFs are established to help with infrastructure projects, and that was also a goal. An objective in the Wilson Yard TIF was to have it available to help replace or repair any infrastructure that was needed across this entire district. The next most known TIF district in Uptown is Lawrence Broadway. You can see here on the right that it stretches from about Leland on the south all the way up into the Edgewater community area to Berwyn, and then really just stretches east along Lawrence Avenue. The heart and soul of this was the entertainment district, also established in 2001. This 74-acre district is nearing expiration at the end of 2025. This one had 16 objectives, and you can read in more detail the underlying report and that homework that Jeff had referenced, outlining the goals and objectives and the homework needed to establish the criteria and meet the criteria. But really, it was about promoting the concentration of entertainment, cultural performing arts that existed for a very long time along this intersection at Lawrence and Broadway. We know the Aragon, we know the Riviera, we know the Uptown Theater, we know the Green Mill. So these physical destinations had existed long before the TIF was established. And as time went on, buildings are needing in repair. And hence, one of the main goals was to establish a TIF to help provide an injection of funds, potential injection of funds to help preserve these architecturally and historic significant buildings. And it's also an opportunity to create investment to stimulate private investment in this area while also supporting new residential. So both for sale and rental for low income households. So across the affordability spectrum, but also to provide upgrades of the public utilities and infrastructure. You're seeing a theme that infrastructure is a real key part of the establishment of TIFs in Uptown. Another one that was most recently extended is the Clark Montrose TIF. So this extends, oh, I see that's the wrong graphic, but it extends along Clark Street from approximately Montrose all the way up just past Lawrence Avenue into the Andersonville area. And this was established in 1999 and was most recently extended. So its current expiration is 2035. Smaller in scale, it was really about encouraging private investment in the neighborhood, also focusing on public infrastructure. Streetscaping was a key priority, having funds available to create cohesive streetscaping and providing enhancements to schools and parks while also encouraging development of new community spaces in this area. One of the other TIFs is on the northeastern end of the Uptown community area. It's the Hollywood Sheridan TIF. It sort of looks like a little worm, if you will, or a snake along Sheridan Road, established in 2007. This is 44 acres in the Uptown and Edgewater community areas. This is really about the preservation and the rehab of the residential and commercial and our public and private institutions in this corridor. But it was also about promoting new residential to accommodate the diverse demographic mix across Uptown and Edgewater. It also focuses on the commercial corridors. So you see it crosses over several key commercial arterials in Uptown and Edgewater, but specifically in Uptown, it really focuses along Argyle Street east of the CTA tracks. So that's really important to know that it wanted to help invest in our commercial areas, but also supporting and improving expansions either to schools, to parks, to community facilities, et cetera. And again, infrastructure, that is a very common one. There are other TIF districts in Uptown, but for the sake of this conversation, we're going to focus on the 4 that I just went through, but there are other ones. So there is a smaller one called Montrose Clarendon, which was established several years ago, and there is the transit TIF. Jeff had alluded to it a little bit ago, but this is really specific to the CTA Red Purple Modernization Project. I think most of us who are on this call see it and experience the construction that is happening on a day-to-day basis. This is enormous TIF district. We're not going to get into the mechanics of it all, but just wanted to flag this as an existing TIF district. But for the purposes of this conversation, we're going to focus on those around our commercial corridors. So what are some of the types of projects that have been approved in the Uptown TIFs? You heard me talk about physical infrastructure. You'll see streetscapes. There's been alley improvements to address flooding that has occurred in alleys. There's been the rehab and new construction of mixed use commercial and residential properties. Uptown United has a volunteer committee called Development Partners, which will review projects that come in and either provide support or not support the projects based on their alignment to the TIF redevelopment plan and what the percentage of the TIF request is in relation to the overall total project cost. So let's go through some key examples, and we've got visuals here just to put some context to the TIF and then what the project is being funded. Black Ensemble Theater is one of the most prominent projects to come out of the Clark Montrose TIF. You can see here, run by Jackie Taylor. Full disclosure, our Uptown Chamber Board president. She and her colleagues years ago, back in 2012, completed this gorgeous renovation or new construction for a new performing arts center. It's 45,000 square feet with a 299 seat main stage. If you haven't been in there, it's absolutely beautiful, but it injected and created a new place for community, for the arts, for theater along this commercial corridor, while also providing classroom space for students as well. The total project cost was approximately $13.5 million, and they got approximately $6 million for this new construction project. Also in the Clark Montrose TIF is Chase Park. So for many folks, Chase Park is a key destination now that the weather is super nice and utilizing all of the track space and the field house. Well, the improvements that happened at Chase Park are a result of TIF funding. It's one of the intergovernmental agreements that Jeff had alluded to. So the first project was playground and fitness center improvements. That was done about 14 years ago. Total project cost is $665,000, and it was funded by TIF. And then more recently, the artificial turf, which whenever I'm in the neighborhood during the week, we see the kids out from the school and the nearby daycares utilizing the space and all the teams that utilize it now. This was also funded by TIF for $3 million, along with improvements to the field house. So you see that TIF in the Clark Montrose area really allowed for investment in these public institutions as well as private institutions. I think everyone here is familiar with the Wilson Yard project. Target, Aldi, that whole intersection is a result of the Wilson Yard TIF. You'll recall that there had been a CTA rail yard there that needed to be redeveloped. The outpost of creating the Wilson Yard TIF was this new multi-phase mixed-use development that included both affordable and senior housing as well as commercial. We all know the target is over 200,000 square feet, along with 23,000 square feet of ground floor retail space. But also of note is you can see here in the density of the building, there's 178 affordable units. The breakdown is 80, approximately 1, 2, 3 bedrooms, and then there are 98 of them dedicated to seniors for 1 bedrooms. This was a very complex project completed in 2010. It cost over $130 million, and it was a multi-phase effort. It's an enormous parcel that required a lot of different components to it. And so the TIF ask for this was $35.5 million. And it really has become the anchor, if you will, in Uptown. And it really is a result of the establishment of the TIF. We also like to point people to Sarah's on Sheridan as one of the gems and really centerpieces that have come out of the Wilson Yard TIF and being able to utilize it. Sarah's on Sheridan was a 6-story building of new construction of affordable housing and supportive services for Sarah's Circle. They are a longtime partner in the neighborhood and provide critical services to individuals that are either homeless or chronically homeless. This project, which was recently completed within the last 3 years and cost just over $18 million, provides 38 permanent affordable studios, as well as 50 beds of interim housing and supportive services. This project only asked for $3.5 million of TIF ask. And if you drive by, it's a great addition to the area and really has leveraged those TIF dollars for this project. So the other large TIF district is Lawrence Broadway. This one recently went under a streetscape, and this was split between Lawrence Broadway and Wilson Yard TIF, but it included new sidewalks, lighting, tree planters, and a gateway. This cost about $5.4 million. And now the public can benefit from a more cohesive look. It has addressed some of the infrastructure needs and also created the plaza, which you see on our website, but people have Instagrammed. It has really become a destination for folks in this more of iconic setting as a result of this streetscape project. Another unknown project that, as I was doing my research on all of the TIF funded projects, was the Uptown Broadway building. You might recognize this is now the home of the Baton Lounge on the ground floor space, but about 14 years ago, 13 years ago, this was a 3-story building in need of real rehab. And so for $4.9 million, of which 1.7 was TIF, this 17,000 square foot building was rehabbed into commercial and office space. And just so thrilled that folks are able to rent out the office space and then have the Baton on the ground floor. And if you have not been over to Sheridan Road recently, just south of Lawrence, highly recommend you get there to see Circus Steam. This is one of the most recent projects to receive TIF dollars from the Lawrence Broadway TIF. It was a gorgeous rehab of the historic 14,000 square foot building. The rendering doesn't do it justice. I highly recommend you go take a look at it, as they took down the mural that was on the facade and have opened it up and have exposed beautiful architecture that was once hidden. This project was $8.4 million and was funded with $5 million worth of TIF. Highly recommend you go take a look at this excellent project. So I didn't get into Hollywood Sheridan and Montrose Clarendon, but don't worry, you can easily get all this information on your own. The City of Chicago has a TIF portal. So if you just utilize this website or Google City of Chicago TIF portal, it'll take you to this website where you can toggle through every single TIF district that exists. And they have identified here either redevelopment projects or infrastructure projects. You can literally click on the dot and it'll give you all the details about the project that you need and about the TIF district. And you can read the redevelopment plan and read all the homework that Jeff had been referencing before. This has become a really great tool in terms of being transparent about the projects that are being funded by TIF dollars, not just here in Uptown, but across the city. This cuts out, but you can see just how many TIF districts exist across the city. Many are new, many have been around for a long time or right in the middle of it. And so this will give you a sense of where we are in the life cycle of TIFs and the different types of projects. So I just wanted to throw this out here for folks. Some people don't know it exists. It's one of my favorite tools that has become available through DPD, and wanted to bring it all to your awareness. And so this is also just a quick look at what a property tax bill of a parcel within a TIF district looks like, so that you can get a sense of how our taxes are being distributed across the different taxing bodies. So you'll see water reclamation, you'll see park district, you'll see schools, and then you'll see the TIF. And approximately 80% of our tax bill is going to the TIF. So a lot of people don't look at their tax bill. This is just as an opportunity to show you what a tax bill looks like, so that you can become educated on how that distribution, if you're located in a TIF district, what that distribution actually looks like. But for some folks, TIF doesn't exist. There are many places in the city that don't have TIF for a variety of reasons. They don't meet the eligibility criteria. The property tax base value is just not there. But for others, there are TIFs that may be set to expire. And so the city has been tackling this issue. You may or not be aware or have read about the development bond project that DPD had been putting forth. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Tim Jeffries, Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Planning Development, to talk through what those alternative funding tools are for those folks. Tim?
Hi, thank you, Sarah. I guess just to start, my children will burst into this meeting at some point, and I apologize for that in advance. It's just going to happen. It's guaranteed. They haven't bothered me the entire time, but now they will. And then, yeah, it's thanks for having me. Thanks for letting me provide this presentation. This is a little bit, I've given this presentation a lot, but only before the bond was approved. So this is the first time I'm actually giving a version of this after approval. So it's, yeah, it's like getting back on a bike, I suppose. Yeah, so as Sarah mentioned, and as Jeff talked about too, you know, TIF is and will remain a strong tool that the city of Chicago has, but there are issues with it. There's that comes, I mean, issues in the structural sense of like, you know, with the tool. It's just that's what TIF is, and there's also issues with how the city has used it in the past, and what that means for our future too. And so the bond, in many ways, was meant to address that. So I guess I'll go through all of that, but at a high level, the new Housing and Economic Development Bond is a 5-year, $1.25 billion commitment by the city of Chicago to make investments continually in affordable housing and community development projects throughout the entire city of Chicago. I mentioned that this was in many ways not an elective choice. This was a necessity because of the structural issues I mentioned that I'll go into more details later. And the reality is that TIF, as it is today, supports a lot of projects, a lot of different things, and a lot of different priorities that when people hear like, oh, that was TIF funded, like that's great, you know. And if we as a city want those kind of investments to continue, we need a source of funding to do that. And if we lack a source of funding, we lack the ability to support those kinds of projects. So I'll discuss that. I'll also discuss that when we were, if anyone ever really wants to live dangerously, I recommend you go to City Council and ask them for $1.25 billion. That was basically a suicide mission, but we were willing to do it because all of this will play out. All of this can happen, $1.25 billion in debt without an affirmative property tax increase, nor any fines or fees or gimmicks. It's just, we will use the money coming back to the city from expiring TIFs to pay down debt service. And hopefully by the end, you'll understand that why we think this is a good idea. It's really that it puts the city on a path to have this long-term, flexible, equitable source of funds that will allow us to do the things that we do right now, but also to take the step into the future and do things that are the things that the community wants us to do, that the elected officials want us to do, that the departments ourselves want to do as well. So I'm going to put some of the like fun stuff up front just to get it out of the way. So $1.25 billion, that is generally split 50-50 between the Department of Housing and the Department of Planning. And how exactly will that money be spent? This is the Department of Housing's allocation. I work in the Department of Planning, so I'm not familiar with these, but I know the talking points. So the significant amount of funding, anywhere between 360 to almost $400 million, is going to go towards their core work, which is generally defined as just building and investing in affordable housing. A lot of that comes through the low income housing tax credit program that they run, or LIHTC, but that will also involve what is being called the social housing model. This is something that is not innovative to the United States. Austria and the city of Vienna have used this model for 100 years, and they have some of the most affordable units in the world, and most integrated income-based, income-wise, I mean, communities in the entire world as well. It's $125 million that will invest in this new model of affordable housing program, and it will be the United States' largest social housing fund when it gets set up. In addition to that, they will be doing retrofitting to help the city meet its climate goals, with smaller allocations for both multifamily units as well as single family. Additionally, the DOH is going to be investing in home ownership models. That's helping people purchase houses as well as to stay in and repair the houses that they live in now, and need assistance with retaining. And then finally, there's a very small allocation for homelessness. This is specific to the preservation of single room occupancy, or SRO units. You can see on the right what we think this will actually end up being. We'll use this money and then we'll get these outcomes over on the side. On the DPD side of things, the very significant majority of the funds, potentially up to $500 million, is going to be engaged in what we call today the community development grants. These are grants to businesses nonprofits, to community-based organizations, to make improvements to the built environment in neighborhoods throughout the city. There's 3 varieties of it. We call them small, medium, and large. Small is $250,000 or less in grant funds. Medium is above that $250,000, but below 5, and then large is anything above. I'll go through a little bit later in the presentation about small and medium, which is where the vast majority of our grant applications lie, and about what our process is to review those. In addition to that, we're going to be, for the first time ever, investing in capacity building around small businesses. Historically, as a limitation of our funding sources, including and especially TIF, we were only able to invest in real estate projects. But with this more flexible source of funds from the bonds, we're able to do things like capacity building and investing in businesses directly. So with that, we're going to be standing up a revolving loan fund that will help address access to capital issues that businesses might have by leveraging relationship with lenders, or providing funds for loan loss reserve or things like that. We'll also be making investments into businesses and sectors that really represent the next generation of Chicago's economy, like things that that will lead Chicago forward and really represent high value investments. Additionally, we're excited to make pre-development grants. We know that to get a project off the ground, you need a lot, and it's the hardest time to find money for when you have an idea, but that's not quite yet a project. And so we're excited to be able to be standing up a program that will help address that need directly by offering pre-development grants that people will go out and they will try to address things like architecture and engineering or zoning or environmental engineering, things that are barriers to them actually, developers and businesses taking the next step to making a project become a reality. And then finally, the last bucket is jobs and wealth building. There's workforce training grants that we'll be offering throughout the city, as well as this what we're calling the missing middle strategy, where communities that are frankly not uptown, but that have some very high, nice properties and some very low income properties, but in the middle, there's not a lot. And it's really, really, really challenging to develop that middle class housing stock in a neighborhood like Inglewood, where there's downward pressure on the lending environment to not lend because of the low income, but you can't go too high because the income base just doesn't exist in the neighborhood like that. But these kinds of houses are needed to build out the commercial corridors that surround these areas and really, make the neighborhood whole again. So DPD will be pursuing this and through a variety of different strategies. Again, outcomes are on the right. But in total, we think that we're going to translate this $1.25 billion into almost 5,500 new or improved homes or residential units, 540 businesses, and that we're going to take our $1.25 billion. We're going to leverage $1.75 billion in outside non-city funds and turn that into $300 billion of investment in our neighborhoods over the next 5 years. That's a lot. It is a lot. I mentioned earlier, like these are the things we want to do, and I mentioned earlier, there's a necessity or a rationale why we need to do that. And it's, as the title says, TIF is becoming a scarce resource. TIF has been over many years DPD and DOH's most critical funding sources. If you just take the annual average allocation, mind you, to both of these two departments, it's about $300 million. But as we stand today, when I first started giving this presentation, I said that we had our toes on the edge of a TIF cliff, but we're in the free fall now. Over the next 4 years, about 45 TIF districts throughout the entire city are going to expire. And that's just going to have a profound impact on the way that we do business. And so when we conceptualized this idea and put it forward and eventually got approval for it, it was with the idea that we would set the city up to be in a position to absorb that loss to some degree, and better than absorb it, but to come out stronger because of it. Because without it, and with these TIFs, if they were to go away, we'd have declining revenue. More money, more problems, but also less money, more problems. That's just the fact. But we'd also have the shrinking geographies. Like, where can we actually spend the money? It doesn't matter on this chart on the right what year it is and how much money we have in any given time if we don't have a geography or a TIF district in place. As Jeff said in his presentation, like we just can't spend money there, even if there's a project that makes sense to everybody. This is what that map looks like throughout the city. Any of the TIFs in the like bright red are going to expire in the next 4 years. Any in the pinkish salmon color are the next 4 years after that. And then the ones in blue will remain long term, 9 years or more. And yeah, I'm mentioning some of the inefficiencies or the problems with TIF because ultimately we theoretically have solutions for this to some degree. We could extend many of these TIFs. We didn't feel like that was the ultimate solution because of the issues on the left. It's number one is the TIF is just an inherently inequitable tool. It generates the least amount of resources in the areas that are experiencing the greatest amount of disinvestment and generate the least amount of property taxes. That's just true. We have the LaSalle Central TIF that's in the downtown area. It generates $180 million a year. That's great for the downtown area. We mostly don't use all that money every year because that's frankly a lot of money to spend in a very limited geography. But in places like Avalon Park South Shore TIF, which runs down 79th Street, in the South Shore neighborhood, it generates about $700,000 a year. And that is for you, me, anyone as individuals on the call, like that is a tremendous amount of money. But for like a project like that we're talking about, either city infrastructure or these private redevelopment, it's just not that much. It's not enough, certainly not enough to support the kinds of projects that we have historically been investing in as DOH and DPD. Jeff also mentioned in his presentation the eligible cost, this notion of eligible cost. He specifically mentioned that, yeah, we're locked out of vertical construction. That is a rule that I believe was first adopted by the state legislature when TIF was created in like 1978. And I don't understand why. I don't understand it. It's maddening to us. It's that, in some places you could have a project at the corner of Main and Main in a neighborhood that is a food desert, and you have a grocer that wants to come and build a new grocery store. We can't do it. We can't do it. We just don't have enough eligible costs generally. And so we're limited in our ability to make strategic investments and investments that make the most amount of sense for neighborhoods, for residents, for elected officials in the departments. We could be in full alignment on like, yes, this is the project that we need, but prior to the bond, like our ability to actually address those problems was very limited. And then finally, and I'm sure this is something that Sarah and the staff of Uptown United deal with a lot, is that the boundaries, how they're drawn, like you can see them on the map. They look gerrymandered. And that's usually a function of the eligibility. Sometimes there's a reason to keep a specific parcel out. Sometimes there's a request to keep a specific parcel out. But the result is we have these jagged sawtooth boundaries, and that sometimes we have situations where you have neighbors like not side by side, and one of them is eligible for TIF or the SPIF program, and the one next door to him isn't. And it's a question. It's a conversation I have every week, and they say, "Why was it drawn this way?" And I'm going to say this line because I can say it. I am only like 1 year left that I can say this. So I respond by saying, "It's like I don't know. I was in high school when these boundaries were drawn." This is like officially the last year I think I can say that. And it feels unfair, and it feels irrational, and it is rational. It is based in logic and a legal basis, but like it can feel irrational and fair, and we recognize that. We do what we can to address it, but it's hard to change boundaries once they're in place. All that said, we identified the opportunity as this the shift to bond shift. And in many ways, this is new groundbreaking stuff for Chicago, but it's not really groundbreaking. Bonding for these things, in many ways, today, the city has something like 129 total TIF districts, which is many TIF districts than many states have on a combined basis. Chicago is far and away an outlier in how we use TIF and the frequency and volume by which we use TIF. Most other cities use bonds. That is how New York, Los Angeles, Seattle, name a peer city of Chicago by any metric, and there is a nearly 100% chance that they utilize bonds to some degree. And then locally, when the former Mayor Lightfoot passed the Chicago Recovery Plan, it did contain, for the first time ever, really, an allocation of bonds for both DPD and DOH. And both departments were able to do some pretty outstanding things with these. Both departments doubled our production in 2 years compared to for DOH the last 2 years. For DOH doubled their production with bonds compared to the last 2 years before that, and DPD doubled our production over the last 8 years combined. We really were able to accelerate how and where we did investments, and that's not just because we had extra money, because not being restricted by geography of TIFs, by the eligible cost of TIF, and able to more efficiently manage our sources really unlocked a lot of possibilities. So we felt that that the use of these bonds showed that we as a city and justice departments could use bonds in an equitable, efficient, and responsible way. I said it's just as important to anything is that this is a totally revenue neutral approach. There is no tax increase as a result of this proposal. And we do it simply by letting TIF districts expire. When TIF districts do expire, as Jeff explained, the chart goes up and the money is sequestered in a TIF district. And when that money comes back, it goes back to the taxing bodies. And so what we're saying is that since we know that we have so many taxing bodies, so many TIF districts expiring in the next, 4 years definitely, but even beyond that, 8-10 years, let's, as a city, simply agree that we are going to let most, not all, but most expire, and we will take some and not all of that revenue coming back to the city, and we will pledge it to debt service. And that there's just the mechanics. I'm happy to talk about it in technical terms if everyone wants to, but there is a very technical way that this happens that means that those monies coming back to the city don't result in a tax increase. And so the green line represents that money coming back to the city and just the city. This same chart would play out with other taxing bodies as well, including CPS, the parks and the county. And so the green line represents that money coming back. You can see that over about a 15-year term that results in a cumulative $300 million a year annual increase to the city's budget. So 300 it's almost it's 250 in 2037. That's 250 again in 2038, 250 again in 2039, plus the money that's coming back too. And the red line is what we project as our debt service, which stabilizes at $81 million. And so in simplest terms, is like, is red line below green bars? If yes, no tax increase. And there is no tax increase, how we're projecting it now. And as a part of the approval of the bond ordinance, we've committed to, the city, the Department of Planning is committed to maintaining this data set, both publicly and in formal report to the city council, so that we can ensure that we're never, red line never above green bar. And so that's really the bond concept as a whole. And we think that this was a very positive, we're very hopeful that it is going to be a sea change and a modernization of the way that Chicago approaches development financing, because it moves us away from TIF, which is, it has been and it continues to be a great resource and a great tool, but it has issues that I mentioned. It also, and some of those relate to being able to address longstanding complaints from communities that don't have TIF, because if you're not in a TIF, you're previous to this, to the bond, you were kind of thunk. You just didn't have things available. This, from a good governance perspective, this is a great thing. This more equitably distributes resources. It relies on parts of the city that pay more in taxes to distribute them equally or equitably to other parts of the city, and frankly brings us in line with national best practices, while additionally giving all of the other taxing bodies a boost. And in the run-up, we really did get a very, very broad, very robust coalition of about 200 civic organizations, nonprofits, and other community-based organizations and the development community that supported this and signed on as supporters. And then finally, I'll just close on, how do you get the money? That's one of the most important things I know. I guess I'll just speak at a high level to the small and medium-sized tracts of grants, because as I said, that's where the highest volume of our projects come from. They're two separate tracks reviewed independently from one another. And the department holds semi-annual, twice a year rounds. And there's a deadline for that round. All applications that are submitted before then get reviewed and then announced. We typically aim to have announcements in the summer and the fall. We should hopefully be having an announcement for the current funding round very soon, by the end of June, please. And with the one following in the fall. So the current upcoming funding deadline is August 9th. And Sarah, I did confirm that the small application will be open soon. So when we review these projects, we utilize a rubric. We use a scorecard, and we try to standardize our approach to these on as consistent as a basis as possible. And to a significant degree, we're trying to bring objectivity to ultimately subjective questions, but we still do use this rubric and try to really align on what is most important. That said, there are still priority factors, including geography. If you have two projects that are completely the same in our scorecard, and one is in Lincoln Park and one is in Austin, our rubric will pick the Austin project 10 out of 10 times. That's okay though, because that's just one factor. The rubric and the scorecard is really hung together to not have any one factor be eliminating. And in many ways, I think Uptown is the poster child for that, because we have really funded a lot of projects over the last couple of years in Uptown, Circus Team, Chicago Market, others as well. So, and I think ultimately, one of the best changes that we've made, and the bond fund really leans into that fact, is that we've created a couple of years back, we created a universal application. And because we wanted to get people away from saying or thinking, I'm applying for TIF, I'm applying for the bond, or I'm applying for NOF, whatever the source may be, because that really requires individual applicants to be experts on each of those sources. And like, nobody needs to be. Like, I and my staff can be that expert. And so we really just tell people to just apply, and let us worry about the funding source for you. And with the bonds, we really do have the ability to go anywhere and do almost anything. And if your source is also a match for TIF, well, then we'll consider you for TIF. And that's great, because we can stretch our dollars even further. But it need not be a limiting factor. You need to have an understanding. It's I say here, it's like we really try to take a project first mentality when reviewing projects. We're looking at the project. Is it a good project? Does it meet the standards of DPD and our requirements to move the project forward? And if it does, like, okay, we're gonna find the source that works to move that project forward. And if it doesn't, then we'll continue to work with you, but you don't have a source yet. That's it for me, Sarah.
Thank you, Tim. I really appreciate it. We've got questions that have come in, and thank you all so much for throwing the questions in. So I know, let's just kind of start. So there was a question, if Jeff, I'll turn this to you. Is TIF only for blighted sites or neighborhoods? Well, you might have answered that, but if you could just quickly address that one.
Short answer is no. So an area can be designated as a TIF area if it is a conservation area, so at risk of becoming blighted. Blight is according to the standards in the law. So I think there's a common misconception that the whole place has to be, fallen down and the buildings are collapsing and there's rats everywhere. So it's a kind of a technical rule, but it can be a conservation area. So that would be the majority of the buildings are over 35 years old, and 3 of the factors are present that in the eyes of the TIF Act is a conservation area. So short answer, no.
Okay. Let's keep moving on. Tim, this question's for you. Who approves use of TIF for projects?
It can there's a number of different answers, I suppose, but I think ultimately for most of the projects that people associate with TIF, a private redevelopment project or community development project, something like Circus Steam, or an affordable housing development, the city council. The department reviews applications, departments, DPD or DOH. We review applications, we make recommendations, but city council ultimately has the authority to approve these projects.
Thank you. There is a specific TIF question for Tim. Are there any updates on the Lincoln Yard TIF, or what happens to a challenged or failed TIF district?
I mean, Lincoln Yards TIF is Cortland Chicago River. It's still there. Like the Sterling Bay has built one building. They continue to work on the like the horizontal infrastructure, the new streets and roads. And I think that it's a hard environment to develop in right now. You know, I think a lot of industry is still feeling the effects of COVID. Lincoln Yards is supposed to be an office project primarily. That's hard in the post-COVID environment. And then interest rates are what they are. And it's a really, there's a lot of factors that are working against them, but I know that infrastructure work is still going on. And I guess to date, the city has paid no TIF money towards that project.
Could you talk about what an extension or an expiration process looks like? I'll either Tim or Jeff, whoever wants to tackle that.
Jeff, I can, yeah, I could.
I know it more generally, and the city is its own creature. So if Tim, you want to go first, I could talk about how it works in the state of Illinois, but not as much with the city of Chicago.
Why don't you give the general?
Yeah, I mean, a TIF
extension
extension in general, it requires an amendment to the TIF Act. So there has to be in the suburbs. Again, I don't know how the city does it. You get your local state rep or state senator to request an amendment to the law, fundamentally the act, the Illinois 65-5, whatever. In order to get that approved, the state representative or senator who's carrying the bill has to have letters of support from all of the affected taxing bodies. So every taxing body, the city, the county, the community college district, all have to write letters of support. I think generally if that is procured, the extension goes through, and then the governor has to sign it. And then usually the municipality has to adopt an amendment. So that's the mechanics of an extension. And an expiration is complicated, I guess I would say that. The power of tax diversion is very clearly going to end after 23 years, but the TIF fund often is kept alive beyond the point, in my experience, not often, but not infrequently, beyond the point after which the increment can be diverted to it. For a variety of reasons. Most notably is property tax assessment appeals take time to cook through, and cities don't want to get caught having to make a payment on an appealed and reduced tax bill 3 years after the TIF extension or expires, because then they got to pay the appeal back to the taxpayer from their general fund. And so they keep the TIF fund open and leave a little bit of money in it just in case and if you have 100 small houses or whatever, it's not a big deal. But if you got particularly a single large taxpayer, that could really whack you. Communities sometimes leave the TIF fund open, and otherwise you got to close it down, and that means either spending the money or surplusing it, giving it back to the taxing bodies. And so the municipalities have to figure out how to get to the finish line and either spend all the money or spend close to all the money or whatever, do what they want to do with the last couple of years of increment.
Yeah, I think that's all that dynamic is generally applicable to Chicago. I think that now today post bond, we're in a very different place because red line is there. And so for Chicago, a continual element of this is going to be is extending a TIF. If a TIF is extended, I mean, the methodology that we use to assume debt service is assuming that most TIF districts are going to expire. We did build in a buffer and make some assumptions that a certain amount of EAV would not go back to the taxing bodies and would remain in TIFs. So part of any analysis that we're going to have is extending this going to push us up above the red line. And if it is, we either can't do that extension, or city council is going to have to vote on the property tax increase, which they probably will not do. And so there's a lot of attention on this issue now, and I can say the DPD and something that we committed to as part of the approval process is coming up with a very data-driven approach to understanding which TIFs we want to expire, and that is going to be driven in large part by where's their demographic need that is highest, and which districts are actually have a sufficient amount of funding that they can actually use to effectuate strong projects. Because, you know, if, as I said earlier, we have TIF districts that generate $200,000 a year, like that really does no service to anyone, and we should let that district expire. Likewise, it will probably be hard to justify keeping the LaSalle Central TIF downtown open for another 12 years. And so we're working on that now. It will be hopefully in place by the end of the year, and we intend to daylight our analysis, put it forward to City Council, and say this is the rubric by which we're evaluating extensions on a move forward basis.
So just a quick follow-up on that, and I think Justin answered it, but I want to read it out to everyone. So when a TIF is extended, does the basis reset, or does it retain the tax proportion when it was first created?
First created.
Okay. And then we have another question. Can you confirm that unused TIF money generated by a particular neighborhood for 20+ years via taxes may never be used in that neighborhood? How is this equitable to those taxpayers?
I think that, well, the taxes wouldn't be used there for 20+ years. I mean, TIFs remain in place because they're used. The city has, over the last 10 years, done a fairly thorough job of any TIFs that have met their purposes, or aren't really being used, or, you know, just aren't justified anymore, or pursuing what we call early termination, basically closing them before 24 years is up. I think we've done something like 25 over the last 10 years. So any TIF that is in place is using the money. And so for 20 years, to say 20+ years unused is probably not accurate. They're using the TIF. The TIF is used in that area, and then, you know, that's it. That's used in the area. Some TIFs are subject to surplus, and some TIFs may have an unused fund balance at the very end of their life, and that money is treated as surplus and goes back to the body as a whole. But that's a function of state law.
But the money goes, I mean, ostensibly it goes back to your other taxing bodies that use it for good things. So if there's a, you know, the fund or the district closes and they mail the check for $1 million maybe back to Cook County, they send some to Cook County, and Cook County does good things with it, we hope, and the city does it in the Park District. So the money it's not locally spent anymore, but it's still going to government services that we all benefit from, I think is where that slice of pie, which generally most, I guess, I don't know the city, again, ending, most suburban places are pretty good about either spending it down or surplusing it or shutting it down or whatever. There's not usually a huge amount of money left over at the end of TIF districts for one reason or another.
Because I'm curious, Jeff or Tim, for areas that are considering the establishment of TIF, how long is that process? Jeff, I know on the consulting side, you guys have to do your homework, you have to do the research. Can you kind of talk through the length of time that goes into the establishment of a TIF? I know it just doesn't happen like that.
Yeah, before you call your consultant, I don't know how long that takes, because that's when I find out about it. But I think sometimes it can take years to get to that point. I know I've spoken to suburbs, having conversations mostly like this, actually, with village boards that had never used the tool before, and they were uncomfortable, and they felt it was a stigmatized tool, and it would reflect poorly on these are more affluent communities with targeted challenges. And it took them years to even consider creating a TIF. So that there can be a long runway. Obviously, city is very comfortable, and it's a mature thing, and the city has clear challenges that make a lot of sense. They've been doing it for a long time. But once you decide to go, short answer, 6 months, I guess, to create a TIF. There's about 3 months, depending on the scale of homework for us, the consultants, and then there's 3 months of process per state law. The city goes a little slower because the city is a more complicated beast than most. But if in a normal suburban environment, you could have a TIF district adopted in about 6 months normally. from the
And
day you
then,
hire us.
and then Tim, once a TIF district is established, how long before projects could potentially apply for TIF funding?
It depends. But when you put a TIF in place, its base is, $100 and they pay the $100. And so it can take a while for these TIFs to really take off, usually after the first triennial reassessment when taxes really jump. So it can be a little bit of time. The city has done things like porting funds, which is moving money from one TIF district to an immediately adjacent TIF district, or we have issued notes or commercial paper debt against future increment. It's not really something we've done recently, but yeah, that is definitely a challenge with the TIF. I think there's some statistic out there that any given TIF generates like something like 50% of its total revenue in the last 7 years of its existence. So it can take a while.
And the process for if a project applies to DPD, we'll just use you as an example. How long is that application process? You've switched to a universal application to streamline things. It's all now online as opposed to calling and having it paper. Can you kind of talk through the length of time on average it would take for a project that is seeking any sort of TIF funds for support, what that process looks like?
Sure. I mean, so people can apply whenever, and then we accept applications at any given time. There's no off period for us. We accept applications, and what we won't do though is start our formal review process until a certain date. The deadline, which is usually there's one in February and one in August. So let's just say it's the deadline. I think the most recent deadline was February 2nd, if I remember, and it took us all of February, March, April to sort of clear it and review things, start making recommendations, and then once we announce, that's it. And so I'm going to be optimistic and say we're going to make an announcement in a couple of weeks. So that'd be what, February, March, April, May, 4 months to review and then find out from the application deadline. Projects that then are selected, it really depends on how ready the project is. We don't only select projects that are like definitively exclusively ready to go. So we've had projects that have closed within like a month or two. That's lightning fast for us. But we also have projects that we offer. Our expectation is that projects move from announcement to closing in 6 months, but we offer 2 6-month extensions.
And to clarify, this is for projects going through the community development grant process, not those formally seeking TIF dollars, right?
No, it's TIF. No, it's
Oh,
TIF too.
there we go. I just learned something.
We only ever review things on like one fixed. Larger projects than that, the 5 million and above, those are really like some projects of some significant scale. So those kind of come in as they come in. But for the $5 million project, which is could be a project anywhere from like $8 million to $20 million about. Yeah, that doesn't matter the source. We're reviewing them through the same construct.
I think that's incredibly helpful for everyone to hear. So thank you. I just want to note that I see Alderwoman Minaa Hoppenworth from the 48th Ward had joined us. So Alderwoman, thank you so much for being here. I want to just share with folks that her office is also available for information through her team on the community development grant process. Our office is also available for if you know individuals or property owners seeking the application process. We know that application like the back of our hand, so we're always here to help folks, but want to be mindful of time. I am so grateful to the SB Friedman team, Jeff and Jillian, for explaining in terms that I think we all understand how TIFs are established and all the criteria and the basic fundamentals, and to Tim and at the DPD team for explaining what the alternative funding sources are. Really, we're all about just letting folks know what options are available. And I guess, Jeff and Tim, if folks have questions, what's the best way to reach you? You could find your information on your website, or how can folks find out more about SB Freeman and then Tim, your team at DPD?
Yeah, I think it's on the website. I guess I gotta look. I don't know. Let me see what, I don't look
So
at my
SB
own
Freedman.
website too much. SB Freeman's got a website, that's for sure. And I don't know if my email's on there, but there's an info email on there, it looks at a minimum. So yeah, we can absolutely get to me that way.
If you guys have any questions as they're pulling it up too, we can always make the connecting email to the SB Freedman team or to DPD. Again, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. This website will, or this webinar will live on our website. Give us a couple days to edit it down, just to make sure it's nice and clean, and then we will get it up on our website. It will be available as a resource. SB Freeman, DPD, thank you for your time. To Justin on my team, Catherine, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks, everybody.